Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, today I'm finally going to get started on making a video on how I do my bread using my fermentation starter. It only takes a total of 4 ingredients and it's super easy. Now just keep in mind that I'm still working on this recipe on how to perfect it and being able to use a whole wheat flour and get it nice and fluffy. But instead of prolonging this video anymore, I want to show you what I'm doing so far, and I've been pretty happy with the results. But today what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a half and half. So I'm going to do half whole wheat flour and half organic white flour. So the whole wheat flour that I have is home ground, pre-soaked, organic, hard white and soft white wheat berries together. So I have a nice all-purpose flour. And you can see the color of that looks almost like a white flour. It's just kind of a beige. So that is your white wheat. Red wheat makes a darker color, and that's the type of wheat you're typically going to find in your store-bought wheat breads. I prefer the white wheat because it has a sweeter, lighter flavor, not so bitter like the red wheat. So I'm going to be using half this I just ground up today, and then half of an organic white flour, which yes, I know is not as healthy, but because the method I'm using, I think does help make it healthier. So we're going to get to it. And the reason I like doing the half and half, especially with this method, is I am just more guaranteed to get a little bit fluffier bread. And I'm only making a small amount, so keep that in mind. I just make a little loaf of bread about like that, and that's just enough for me and Mr. Rain. So what I'm starting with is I'm going to do a 1/4 cup of the white flour, and then a 1/4 cup of the whole wheat flour. And I'm just, you see I'm putting them in this jar. There we go, that's probably a better angle. So I'm using this little canning jar here. And now what I'm going to do is, so what I have here is I have a 1/2 cup of flour. And now I'm going to do a 1/2 cup of my raisin fermentation starter, so that I have equal amounts, half flour and half fermentation starter. Now, if you're wanting to make a bigger batch, I would say go twice as much. Do a whole cup of flour and a whole cup of your fermentation starter, and that's why I doubled the size of the raisin, is so that because I'm liking this one for the bread, because the aroma and that little bit of raisin flavor. Now I'm just going to put the raisins back in there. I'm going to put in a little bit of sugar back into the starter, and then top it off with more rainwater. Now, if you're looking for a quicker bread recipe, something that you can have done in a day, this isn't it. I will do my a video down the road on just how I do my regular yeast bread using store-bought yeast, and it's a pretty quick method. I get a good, fluffy, wonderful bread, but that will be later. Right now we're doing this because I've been experimenting with the fermentation starter just to get a healthier bread. So this is a longer process. Now what I'm going to do is mix the liquid yeast into the flour. As usual, I prefer to use wood, bamboo, whatever when dealing with my fermentation starter, and I try to avoid metal. You could also use glass. You could also use a chopstick. I got these great little bamboo forks at a health food store in town that we get to once in a while. So you see I've got that mixed. Now look at how bubbly it is already. That's from the fermentation starter. Whoop, I got a big glob here. I still got to mix in. You just want that really well blended. And again, if you're wanting a bigger loaf, double that so that this jar will be pretty much filled all the way to the top if you're using a pint-sized jar. Now, I'm putting on a Tatler lid. You can use a metal lid if you want. I've just been trying to get more and more, even though I still have metal lids on these. where I'm staying away from the metal lids for the fermentation stuff and using the Tatler. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this in a warm place overnight. So I should have this turned into bread tomorrow, and I will finish the video up then. So typically this time of year, what I've been doing is putting it in the greenhouse. But since it's a little chillier lately, I'm going to go ahead and stick this on top of my refrigerator and let it sit for about 24 hours, 18 hours maybe, plenty. Either way, I'm not going to get to this again until tomorrow. So I'll be back tomorrow when I'm ready to finish this process and show you how I make some bread with this. Alright, so I'm back. It's the next day, or next morning rather, and I'm getting ready to move on to the next step. Let's see if you can see what that looks like in there. It should look a little bubbly, and it should smell very fermenty. And now I'm just going to dump all this straight into the bowl. And again, just remember this is a very small batch that I'm making because we just don't eat a lot of bread. Yeah. And so thus, when I add the salt, I'm only going to put just a little bit, like not even a half teaspoon. So depending on the size you make, you could, if you're making a lot, you may want a whole tablespoon even, or, you know, but a standard size loaf of bread is going to take about a teaspoon of salt. Now I'm also going to add, and this is just a matter of choice, I'm going to add a little bit of fat to it, so I'm going to pour in maybe about 1/8 to 1/4 cup of oil. I really don't measure it out, I just pour it in there. Just to have a little bit of fat in there, because I just think it makes, at least a little bit, just makes a nicer bread. But it's really not necessary. I mean, when it comes right down to it, you could make this with just flour and your fermentation starter if you wanted to. Okay, so from this point, I'm going to start adding more flour. This is the flour I ground today. That is my whole white wheat flour. And so I'm going to add equal parts of each in until I get this the consistency I want. So I just put in a 1/4 cup of that. Now I'm going to put a 1/4 cup in of the white. And I have done this, like I said, I've done this with just the whole wheat flour, and it makes a really tasty bread. But for the sake of the video, I'm hoping to get a fluffier bread, which you can achieve by going half and half. It's still going to be healthier than total white flour bread. And then with the fermentation starter and the long process it takes for it to rise and stuff, you're fermenting the flour, you're soaking the grains basically, so it's just going to make it healthier all the way around. Okay, so I'm just about there with all the flour I need to get kneading. Okay, so right now at this point I have more whole wheat flour than I do the white flour. So I'm going to switch back to the white for this. And I'll probably be just the right amount. And if I still need more flour after I work through this 1/4 cup of white, then I'm just going to stick to just the whole wheat after this. So, you know, they always tell you about 10 minutes knead time. Now, as far as kneading bread goes, it's all going to depend on how vigorously you knead and the way you knead it. I go back and forth between the folding and rolling to the just squishing it with my hands like this, the actual kneading it with my hands. And it's also the size of the bread that you do is also going to determine how long you need to do it. I just don't even watch the clock anymore. I've been making bread, yeast bread, since I was 16 years old, and so I've got a pretty good idea how the bread is supposed to feel when it's ready. Now, I don't think I'll need any more flour at all. I think that's going to be just right. Okay, so the consistency is looking pretty good. Make a nice little ball out of it. Okay, so now I'm going to take my bowl that I just cleaned up, that I was mixing in. It's still a little bit wet, so I'm not spreading the butter very well. But Just spread a little butter around in there. Find it just as easy to use my bare hands to do that. And then spread the extra all over the dough. This will help keep it from drying out as it's rising. Alright, so now you're going to want to cover it with a towel and then set it in a warm place to rise. And it's going to take, it could be an hour, it could be 3 hours. So you're going to want to keep checking it. And it's also going to depend on how warm of a place you're going to put it. So I'm actually going to put this in the greenhouse. So, and I'm going to do 2 rises on this. So I'm going to do the rise in the bowl, and then I'm going to put it in the pan that I'm going to bake it in, and then I'm going to let it rise again before I bake it. Okay, so I'll be back when this is ready for the next step. Well, Patrick and I just came back from picking blackberries, and we were gone for like 3 hours, and my hands are pretty stained. I watched them several times, and they're still stained. But 5 gallons, it's our second 5 gallons of blackberries we picked so far this year. Anyway, so my bread didn't rise very much, sadly, but you can see what it looks like, and it still smells really good. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a try. Sometimes it'll rise a whole bunch, and sometimes it won't. Again, dealing with live cultures, you just really never know what it's going to do. And I want to show you this cool little kettle. I got it all buttered up. This is what I'm going to be baking it in. I actually got this whole set, cast iron set, at a garage sale for $5. I have 3 different sizes, and I like the shape of this for baking the bread, so especially since I'm doing such a small little loaf. So I'm just going to reshape it, and I'm not going to bother putting flour or anything in it. I'm just going to go ahead and put it in here, and I'm going to let it hopefully rise for a little bit longer, and then I'm going to bake it in my toaster oven that's plugged into our solar. So I do all my baking, like pies and breads, in that plugged into the solar in the summertime, so I can get a nice brown, top to it. And even if it doesn't rise a lot, it still turns out pretty good, which is another reason I like doing a small loaf, because even if it's heavy, it's still really good when you eat it real fresh. So we'll give this a try and see. And I was hoping that the batch I do for the video was going to be the one that rises really good, and that's why I did half white flour. But anyway, I'll be back when this is, I'm going to let this rise for about an hour, and then I'm going to put it in the oven, and I'll be back when it's all done so I can show you what it looks like. Alright, so I just got this out of the oven. I baked it for 20 minutes. I forgot to say that. At about 400 degrees. And so you can see what it looks like in there. It actually did rise a little bit once it got in the oven, which is what I thought it might do. So I'm going to go ahead and dump it out. And it's kind of funny looking. Again, it looks like a little spaceship. Or a hamburger? Anyway, I'm going to let it cool a little bit, and then I'm going to slice into it, and we'll see how it turned out. Okay, so I'm ready to cut into my bread. I should probably go this way since it's already halfway cut that way, but let's cut it this way. Oh, actually, that doesn't look too bad at all. Sure smells good. It's still steaming. So I am going to put some butter on these and take a couple pieces out to Mr. Rain, who's working hard in the shop. Alright, so there is how I've been making the bread so far with the fermentation starter, the homemade fermentation starter. And if you haven't seen that video on how I make that, you can find that right up here. Now, I'm going to keep experimenting with it because I feel like I'm still not done. I would like to keep trying some different things and working with it in different ways to see if I can speed up the process a little bit and also get it to where it's good and fluffy. However, to me, I think that bread generally is going to be healthier the longer the process, and anyone who makes sourdough will know. Now, this is not sourdough in the sense of it's not made the way typical sourdough is, with that little more sour type taste. It's going to be a little bit different, and as I said, I was trying to look for something with a different flavor, though I love sourdough and I love the taste of sourdough. I wanted to just try something a little bit different and also see if using the fermentation starter would work just as well, if not better for me. So I only have to have that one thing in my fridge and not a sourdough starter that I have to remember, because we don't make bread I don't make bread as often as I used to. Now, stay tuned for future videos, because though I do have some videos out, or at least one, on how I make cinnamon rolls using just a standard yeast bread. I do have my own recipe for using regular store-bought yeast, and that makes a good fluffy bread, whether I use whole wheat or half and half or all white. And I will be doing future videos on that, like how I make my pizza crust and stuff like that. So be watching for that. However, like I said, I'm going to keep experimenting with this, and every time I try something new and think I kind of can tweak it to get it just a little bit better, then I will be doing update videos on that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this and you'll at least give it a try. And remember, if it fails one time, just keep trying, because it's going to act different each time you do it, which is what I found. I get a different result every time for the most part, but it's always good. Even if it's heavy, it's still very tasty, especially if you eat it up right away. That's why I like the small loaves. All right, hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.